dear ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear colleagues. I'm very happy to greet everyone. It is a great pleasure for us to be able to analyze Hungarian-Ukrainian relationship at today's event with excellent experts. Today's conversation will be extraordinary as we will have an opportunity to talk about 30 years of relations between Hungary and Ukraine. Today we are talking about past 30 years, but at the same time, in a way, we're talking about the next 30 years also. And today we can abstract from daily hardships and difficulties and look at this important relationship from strategic perspective. Harvard University professor William Ury calls this method going to a balcony, where one steps back from ongoing negotiation, assesses the situation, and develops an objective view of this situation. Today we are looking for a new perspective, objective view on Hungarian-Ukrainian relations. Let's not focus on everyday difficulties, but analyze the past in a more comprehensive, strategic approach and look to the future. But before presenting our panel today, I would like to invite Marton Ugrosdi, Director of Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, to greet you all and officially open today's event.
Thank you and welcome to the Institute at what might be one of our last public events here in this building. But as times are changing, we're changing as well. And I think that is also true to the Ukrainian-Hungarian relationship to a large extent, which has been quite essential, I think, for the stability and security of the region for a long time. And as Yuri highlighted very well, maybe today we shouldn't focus on what divides us, but what connects us, and how we can make the next 30 years a bit different than what we have seen in the last 4. Having said that, I think it's important to remember that this 30th anniversary is not the first one, because Hungary and Ukraine already established some kind of diplomatic relationship back after the First World War, which was short-lived. We also celebrated it a couple of years ago together with the Embassy of Ukraine. And of course, in the last days of the Soviet Union, we should remember that Hungary was among the first countries which have recognized the independence of Ukraine. And if I remember correctly, we were the first one who have opened an embassy in Kiev. So in that way, I think there are some achievements that we can be proud of. I think what followed after that, which resulted in the signing of the basic treaty between the two countries, was also important, which says the basics of our relationship. And we do know that politics is complicated, but we also know that you cannot choose your neighbors. So I think sooner or later we'll have to find ways, and we will find ways, how we can iron out existing differences and have that kind of relationship that we had initially, with a great amount of goodwill, great amount of cooperation, and a great amount of respect and self-respect on both sides, which has basically framed our relationship in the last 30 years. But since I'm not an expert on Ukraine, to be honest, I'm just a keen observer, if I may put it that way. We have invited an excellent set of people, and I dare to say an excellent set of friends today to speak about the last 30 years and the upcoming 30 years. So I'll stop here because obviously they're the experts and not me, and they will be much more interesting than I can ever be on Ukraine. So thank you very much, and Yuri, back to you.
Thank you very much for a greeting from Marton Ugrosdi. It's time to introduce our panelists today. First, Anton Bendarjevskiy. He's a director of research at Danube Institute, which is one of excellent think tanks in Hungary. His research deals with post-Soviet region. Next, Attila Demkó. He is a head of a center of geopolitics at Mathias Corvinus Collegium, which is one of the most important talent management institutions in Hungary. And finally, our guest from Ukraine, Dmytro Tuzhanskyi. He is director at Institute for Central European Strategy. He is one of the most open-minded and constructive Ukrainian experts dealing with Ukrainian-Hungarian relations. And now about the structure of today's conversation in a few words. First of all, each of our invited experts will share his main thesis on 30 years relationship between the two countries in 5 minutes each. After that, we tell us the main thesis about the 30 years ahead of our countries in 5 minutes. Also in the context of speeches, we will have an opportunity to react to each other. And finally, we will open a Q&A session to engage our guests and partners in this dialogue. As usual, we spend a little over an hour on today's event. And before I give the floor to our guests, I would like to make 3 brief points. In my view, these issues may hinder the development of a Ukrainian-Hungarian relationship in the next period. Firstly, about the communication. We see how the Hungarian energy security aspirations, which are no different from Austrian or German aspirations, being interpreted as a backlash. We see how the work of Hungarian foundations in Ukraine, which is no different from work of organizations such as USAID or Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, being interpreted as destructive. We see how the Hungarian minority policy, which, like in case of Israel, nurtures and preserves the intellectual and cultural unity of the members of a nation worldwide, being interpreted as separatist. In a very friendly way, we can understand all of this as misrepresentation, a mistake stemming from the heat of political debate. Looking more objectively, we can talk about how strategic communication is deployed in our relations. Some of the more confrontational analysts, journalists, politicians may even talk about propaganda. Fortunately, everybody here is objective and friendly. So I think it is a good idea to stop this kind of miscommunication. Secondly, the fact that all international politics is local. On one hand, this means that the domestic politics of our countries can facilitate or hinder relationship between the two countries. On the other hand, it also means taking ownership of a region. Actors from outside the region, even allies, have different interests simply because of their geographical location. So this is why Hungarian foreign policy focuses on regional cooperation, V4 Free Seas initiative, in which we involve our allies from outside the region, for example, G7 countries. Ukraine foreign policy places great emphasis on cooperation with G7 countries and devotes less energy to building relations with neighbors. But without neighbors, especially with stable political system, there are no lasting solution to any regional problem. Third and last point, where all of our allies in formulating Ukrainian-Hungarian compromises. We know that Russia is not interested in good relations between our countries. Our allies, on the other hand, took on the role of mediator at the beginning of our debates. and urged a compromise. Nowadays, however, we seem to have moved in the direction of one-sidedness. Many grants and significant events sponsored by our allies have to promote the Ukrainian point of view, while we do not see similar support for the Hungarian point of view. We hope that in the next period, our allies will return to the role of impartial mediator again. It is in interest of all of us to have close, positive relationship between our countries. We all hope that our relationship can develop positively over the next 30 years. And to achieve this, we need to talk honestly with each other about our issues. That is why we organize such events as today. And now I suggest that we listen closely to our invited experts. Let's talk about the past 30 years in the first round. And maybe let's start with Attila Demkó.
Thank you very much for this very kind invitation. I would like to underline that I'm not an expert in Ukraine. I'm also a keen observer, a very keen observer. And I started to observe Ukraine right after the independence. So let me share 3 memories of Ukraine, 3 personal memories. So my first visit to Zakarpatskoye Oblast, to Beregszesz, to Berehovo was in 1993. So at the beginning, we can say that. And it was March the 15th, which is a very important date actually for Hungarians and an important date for Ukrainians also. It was a really nice visit in many ways. Ukraine was in a bad situation in the early 1990s, but the welcome, not only the welcome of the Hungarians, but the welcome of the local Ukrainians was very warm. And I remember that we could sing freely the Hungarian national anthem on this very important day for Hungary, hundreds of us in a school. And it was really unique because we couldn't do the same freely that in Slovakia or in Romania, where the Hungarian minority also lives. Hungarian communities, large Hungarian communities also live. So Ukraine was for us a place of freedom to express ourselves beyond Hungary's borders in our own language. We could see the Hungarian flags. We could see the real welcome in Ukraine. And for year after year, I visited always Zakarpatskoye region, Kárpátalja in Hungarian, with happiness, because I didn't feel discriminated. I didn't feel bad about visiting. So we thought, and I personally thought, that this is a start of a beautiful friendship. And I think it was for years. So there were very big gestures Hungarian community and Hungary received from Ukraine. I think we reciprocated these gestures. Just to say one example, next to the Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is a statue, a Ukrainian statue, and of course Ukraine allowed us to have the statue where the Hungarians mythologically, but I think factually, also entered the Carpathian Basin in sometime at the end of the 9th century. So it's a symbolical thing that we also, and also the statue, for example, Princess Anastasia in Tihany was not in Russian colors but in Ukrainian colors, and I think it shows that we rather give the gesture to Ukraine. So that's the first memory. The second memory, I was in NATO working as a defense counselor for the Hungarian embassy in 2014 when the crisis started in Ukraine. And I organized the first meeting between the Hungarian Minister of Defense and the new Ukrainian Minister of Defense after Maidan. And actually, I wrote the talking points. You usually wrote talking points to ministers what to talk about. Of course, in agreement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we always coordinate these positions. So the first thing we said, that we support the new Ukraine. We support Ukrainian integration to EU and NATO. That's what our minister said, and that's what we thought, that we are ready to support Ukraine in every way. to integrate to Europe. Ukraine is a European country. Ukraine deserves to have a choice. So we said all that. The second thing we said, that please don't touch the rights of the Hungarian community in Ukraine. This was after the first thing in the Rada was to go after the 2012 language law. So for us, it was a shock that the first thing after the revolution, after a pro-European revolution, this is the most important thing to do. Because for us, the 2012 law was very positive for the Hungarian community. So we were in a bit of shock that this is the first thing Ukraine wants to do. And I understand, of course, Ukrainian history. I read quite a lot of books, and I don't know how many, maybe 100 times I have been at least to Ukraine and talking to Ukrainians. But this was a bit of shock. And let me turn to the third, and very shortly, third memory, the memory of the front line. I visited several points on the front line, and we have to understand, of course, in Hungary, however we felt offended and hurt by the last, especially after 2017, the event that Ukraine is a country at war. It cannot explain away everything, but still it explains a lot that Ukraine is in a very tough situation with cities having got such artillery strikes as in the Second World War, totally destroyed. Tens of thousands of deaths. I don't believe it's only 14,000 dead on the front line, definitely more than that. So we have to see that, of course, that Ukraine is in a very difficult situation. We have to understand, we have to internalize that we have to be cautious, of course, what we say and how we say it. But also, I think it's very important to talk, and that's why I'm very happy that we are talking now with Dmytro, and who just organized 2 or 3 weeks ago a great event, and we were invited. So this is the way to do it, and this is, I think, very important to do.
Yeah, so one more time, hello to everyone, and thank you for the invitation. CEO, yes, jó napot kívánok, it doesn't matter. So the title of our conference is like about ups and downs of the 30 years of these diplomatic relations. And when I was traveling to Budapest, it was not so long trip, but at least you have time to think about. What are you going, not just to talk, present data, because I bring you some interesting data I'm going to share with you, probably objective one, or at least some stones we could like use. But I try to think what kind of relation we have and what is the status of that relation and kind of analogy we could use. And to understand not the problem of this relation, but the challenge of this relation. Because we started, yes, what Martin told, that Hungary was the first, or at least one of the first country which opened the embassy in Kiev. Yes, the football match of national team, it was the first in Uzhgorod, in Ungvar, between Hungary and Ukraine. So we started from these very, very good points that also Attila mentioned, but right now we are so ended up with not so good summary. Yeah, we have even blacklist, and what is important right now in public, we have only some Hungarian part of that list, but I must not confess, but inform you that there is also the Ukrainian part of blacklist. It's almost 10 people or even more. So we are probably so frustrated because 30 years what we spent for, and what kind of relation it is. And from my point of view, it is like a Tisa river. So it's not about ups and downs, but it's also, because it's the mountain river, but it's snaky. So I think these relations are pretty smooth because I couldn't provide and couldn't share with you any like a breakthrough, real breakthrough in this relation for 30 years. But on the other hand, about downs, big downs, actually no, because even that tension that we have for the last 4 years, it's more a little bit like a buzz. So no real danger, no real real bad news. I mean, from both sides, because even during that campaign against Ukraine educational law from Hungarian side, it was nothing, just collecting of signatures, no protests, nothing, no riots, nothing what you could read in these Russian or pro-Russian or some other manipulative media outlets like Karpatoyo or Zakarpattia, it will be second Donbass or something like that. On the other hand, if you will visit Hungarian schools in Zakarpattia, you will also talk to the teachers. They are, of course, afraid what will be the new framework of education, I mean, in part of the language in 2023. But if you ask them, something changed or everybody's chasing you and following you, are you speaking in Ukrainian or not, or you turn everything into Ukrainian, they will say, no, actually, nothing changed already. So my point of view that we still in this, let's say, pretty balanced level, and it's good. So we don't cross the red lines sometimes, and for the last few years, we are talking about all these red lines from the Hungarian part. So please don't touch the minority rights, and from the Ukrainian side, despite all this political buzz. And the following this analogy with the Tisa, what does it mean? That this is not the main river, not in Ukraine, not in Hungary. I mean, so it's not Danube, it's not Dnipro. So, and this is the relation the same. It's not, it's very, let's say, in Ukraine perspective, it's very regional and like second level of relation. And to be honest, in Hungary, it's also not the core of the foreign, all these politics and so on. And it's sometimes good, sometimes bad, because from both sides, I think, we have no enough time to manage this relation, at least during 30 years, because I think that effort that was done, it's not enough for such relations, for such relation between immediate neighbors, between neighbors with really not even common history, but very close history, especially if you check the riot of 1956 and 2014, you will find, like tremendous similarities. And from the motto Heroyam Slava and Dichusheiko Hushuknek to the like examples when how people were killed. Yeah, it was shooting from the roofs, and the core idea of that riots and of that revolutions, or I don't know how you called it, in Ukraine or in Hungary is a different version, but it was against empire, it was against Soviet, and it was for the independence. And the same happened in Ukraine. Just the half of the century so after. And in this way of thinking, I just came to the mind and to the idea that take a look, if such relation developing or develop in such a way, and we ended up with this conclusion of blacklist and so on, and on the other hand, we didn't cross the red lines, maybe this is actually the goal or the purpose, or maybe a perfect model of coexistence, which the key actors from both sides are seeking. Because take a look, right now, it's a pretty comfortable situation for key players from both sides, because on the one hand, there is no danger of any kind of separatism in Zakarpattia, of Hungarian. It's clear because we even conducted the survey last year for the Open Zakarpattia project, and according to the data, the level of separatism motivation in Zakarpattia, it's less than the error of the sample, so even less. On the other hand, the situation is also clear that Ukraine is not going to assimilate Hungarians. We don't wanna, and we can't, because it's not our motivation. So in this case, in case of the, let's say, core problems of our current tension, everything is okay. Yeah, so it will be no second Donbass in Zakarpattia, no second Crimea, no Hungarian separatism, no assimilation. And so the current situation for key players from both sides, not all, but key players, I don't want to name them, but for them it's like perfect because no danger. They control the situation, they have the mass, they maintain the mass, and they get the leverage. Somebody take the political leverage, somebody take money, and so on. And this mass is like, oh, this is what we want for to achieve for 30 years of our relations. I think it's totally crazy if we are really seeking for such relations and for such ending up, despite it is the most comfortable position for many politicians, institutions from both sides. I think it's at least unfair because there are many of the real like issues in interest of both sides. Ukraine and Hungary should, take and negotiate about. And just want to present you few data which help to sum up these relations. So our institution, we offered the survey, a national-wide survey. It was conducted by two main sociology group in Ukraine. So after 2004, we have no problem with sociologic agencies. They provide really clear data. And for example, just a disclaimer, probably these data could a little bit confuse you and maybe upset, but I think it's a really optimistic one. So we asked, what do you think about Hungary's current policy towards the Hungarian minority in Transcarpathia? Support of schools, teachers, grants, and so on. And 41.4% of Ukrainians answered that this is preparation for possible annexation of the territory of Hungary and so on and so on. So this is like, whoa. But if you check these data and this question in our survey we conducted last year just in Transcarpathia, you will have opposite different data. It will be, let me tell you, it will be 40% of locals in Zakarpattia, in Transcarpathia, will answer that this Hungarian support, it's helping the region to develop, and 31% of locals will answer that this is the real help of the neighboring country to Ukraine. So what does it mean? This data doesn't mean that Ukraine, not Ukraine, but so Hungary wants to, I don't know, somehow attack Ukraine. It's a question of trauma of Donbass and Crimea, because the real annexation and occupation started from in public, it was the same, supporting the schools and so on and so on. But on the other hand, it shows that actually Hungary has no strategy towards Ukraine, but have just a strategy towards Zakarpattia. So this is also a gap, because, and vice versa. In Ukraine, we have no, if Ukraine and Ukrainians think and answer that Hungary is preparing an annexation of Zakarpattia, it means we don't know Hungary. We don't understand Hungary at all as a state, as a nation. We are just following the fears, the trauma, and that's it. But let me just to be more like optimistic, and in the same the answer of the same question. So almost 20% of Ukrainians, it's a national-wide survey, so 90.9 said an answer that this is the real friendly help to Hungarian minority in Zakarpattia. So even in national-wide, despite all these campaigns, tension, Russian propaganda, and so on and so on and so on, every fifth Ukrainian think that what is Hungary is doing in the Carpathia, it's a real help. And 20.3% of the people who answered this question, so one more, so every fifth person said, I don't know. You know, it means that we still are in this, like, so we still in Ukraine know almost nothing about Hungary, about Hungary's interest, about Hungary's real goals, and all of we have a plenty work to do. Yes, and just to end up, based on the data of this survey, right now in Ukraine we have this model of association trio, Ukraine plus Georgia plus Moldova. And what is interesting that in this survey we put also Moldova to this question: how do you think which country supports Ukraine accession to the European Union, and so on and so on, or to which country you are going to travel, what the kind of products you're going to buy, and so on. And Hungary is much higher than Moldova. So it's also very, I think, optimistic, direction point that despite our tensions, we still are very close, very, let's say, at least neutral. That's why, from my point of view, despite of 30 years of these already relations, we are still in the position of just re-meet each other, re-understand each other, and let's start from very bottom. I know that many of you, many of us, we are debating of real breakthrough, and maybe at little bit we even expect the breakthrough today, because it will be the meeting of both MFA ministers in Riga. But take a look, let's switch a little bit from breakthroughs to very baby, small steps, introduce each other through streets, I don't know, buildings, explain history, and let's re-meet each other once again. Thanks. Sorry for a little bit more.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I will also start with sharing some memories like Attila. Well, I can talk about the 30 years memory of mine, because regarding Ukraine, because at that time I was a small boy on the other side of Ukrainian border in Belarus. However, my very first time I was speaking here in the Institute of, at that time it was called Hungarian Institute of Foreign Affairs. It was in 2010. And my very first time when I was speaking here was about Ukraine. We had, it was an event about Ukrainian elections, Quo Vadis Ukraine. We were assessing the results of elections, and we're talking about either, for Hungary, either Yanukovych is a good option, or it's Yulia Tymoshenko. And since that time, in the last 11 years, I think the relations of Ukraine and Hungary made really a big changes. Following the elections, Hungarian PM had several meetings with the Ukrainian president at that time and prime ministers at that time. And I wanted to just share some description of Hungarian relations from that time, from 2000. I have one from 2013. It's from a Ukrainian book on foreign relations from Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, how they describe the relations of Ukraine and Hungary. Stably positive relations, missing any critical or problematic components. So this is a handbook done for the students of University of Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, 2013. Then another one from 2015, Laszlo Brezovich, who was since the time called persona non grata from Ukraine. Well, he doesn't know about that. Okay, so he had a meeting together with the Prime Minister of Hungary and the President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, in 2015. And at the meeting, he said that Hungarian minority doesn't feel any kind of discrimination on the basis of nationality. And 5 years later, he was expelled from Ukraine, basically. But we are talking about 2015. Then 1 year later, the Prime Minister of Ukraine at the time, Hrojsman, visited Hungary in November 24, 2025. And it was also a very positive meeting with Hungarian Prime Minister and Mr. Hrojsman. And he said that the relations of the two countries are very good. The presence of Hungarian minorities is a value for Ukraine, told Mr. Hrojsman in 2016. So up until 2016, with the administration of Petro Poroshenko, there were Mr. Viktor Orban met 5 times with Poroshenko, and I think 2 or 3 times with Mr. Hrojsman. And well, since 2017, no meetings with Poroshenko, no meetings with Zelensky. And it's interesting if you talk about this kind of reality or this kind of relations with Hungarian students at this time, this year, last year, they're living in this reality. They started their students studying at the international relations or geopolitics. For them, by default, the relations of Hungary and Ukraine are bad. So you can find a positive opinion on these relations. However, just a few years ago, describing all these statements, we had so good relations with Ukraine and Hungary. And György asked me to make a thesis in these 5 minutes. So my thesis is that this last 4 years is just, it's a dead end. It's just a small change, but we should go back to the stream of these good positive relations with Ukraine, and I think we will soon. And when I was thinking about what should I say here, and I was thinking how could I demonstrate the relations of Ukraine and Hungary, I was thinking maybe we should check Wikipedia, because most of the people who just Google this topic, they have the information, they get the information from Wikipedia. So what can we find on Wikipedia regarding the page of Hungary-Ukraine relations? Well, in Hungarian language, there are no such page of which is very bad, I think. We have, however, we have it in Russian, Ukrainian, and English. Russian page has 3 paragraphs. Well, starting with the information about the first contact, the embassy, that's the first paragraph. Then change 2017, the blocking of NATO and EU, and then 1 paragraph about the trade relations of Hungary and Ukraine. And then Ukrainian, it's pretty long, but like 90% of it's about history, about relations in the 14th century, in 17th century, 20th century. And then there is also 1.5 paragraph regarding relations since 1991. Also very negative paragraphs. Then English, again, a lot about history. And then 3 paragraphs starting from, so the time from independence starts in 2017. And all the 3 paragraphs are negative regarding the NATO, Hungarian NATO bloc, regarding the conflict about minorities, the gas contract, the recent one, Hungarian gas contract, and the conflict about that. And that's it. So either we don't see any information in the Wikipedia, like in Hungarian, about the relations, or what we see, they're very negative. No information about all these good relations before that, or no information about, let's say, the handling of the Hungarian relations after following the revolution, that Hungary helped Ukraine with gas rivers, that Hungary helped with the treatment of Ukrainian soldiers, the humanitarian aid of $36 million. Nothing about that. So maybe somebody should update the Wikipedia, I don't know, but that could be a good start.
Thank you very much. We are setting the stage for the next 30 years. I think that we can see that really the narratives influence our foreign policy and opinion of our societies. So this is not a good thing, as we see. So we have to manage our narratives more properly. And I think that the next round of this discussion should be about the future of our relations. And I kindly ask you to present your thesis on what can we do better and what we should do in the next period. And I suggest we start with Dmytro, who is very optimistic guy, and this is why it's always worth speaking about the future with him. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I started with this analogy between our relations and the Tisa River. And yes, it's really clear for me that as this river is full of garbage right now or permanently, relations between Hungary and Ukraine is also full of garbage. And in this river of our relation, there is not only Russian pets. Yes, Russian pets, all these garbage are most dirty one, most ugly one, but not just these pets in this river of relation. So we have to start from cleaning the river. Yeah, and this is responsibility of Kiev and Budapest, not of Brussels, not of Berlin, not of Washington. It was few trials to use these proxies, especially in 2018. Sometimes it was successful, sometimes it not, but it was not sustainable because all the efforts of Wes Mitchell team or some other teams, yeah, it was good, it was interesting, it was global, yeah, because these let's say pretty regional bilateral tension already became kind of a global problem, global game. Yeah, okay, interesting. And US involved, Russia involved, oh, nice. But the problem is that it ended up with burning of the center in Uzhgorod, the Hungarian center, and it was organized by Polish proxies, German proxies, and actually Russians. One of them was organized at least. Yeah, so how we should clean the river from the garbage? To one more time to have these very fresh, very clear relations. So we have to get out from these relations none of the institutions which are get out institutions which are not responsible for these relations. What I mean, I think, and I stress that bilateral relations should be concentrated in the hands of this MFA level. So we should clear relations from this security point, from all these fears of separatism, blah, 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 intervention, so on and so on. So diplomats should start as the first line to talk about these relations, because there are no reason for these fears, of such and these security matters. The only security issue in our relation is interference of the, let's say, of third sides, and it doesn't mean only Russia. I mean, everybody who wants to challenge these official bilateral relations should be banned. Is it Russia or is it some of local players, local groups with wrong motivation? They should be so out of this. And so it should be concentrated in the levels of MFA. We have not so much time, I think, for this, let's say, reset, because right now we have campaign in Hungary. It's difficult till probably May to have any kind of reset or breakthrough, because it's really, we go very deep in this blaming each other from both sides. That's why we need a little bit, time and a little bit stratcom communications, to change these narratives. But we will have time probably from May to the late of autumn. because then in Ukraine we'll start campaign, and it will be also difficult to deal with such issues like language, like education, like dual citizenship, NATO, and so on. And why important this, let's say, 1 year, next year? Because it was not just between two campaigns in both countries, but it was exactly before 2023. So 2023, it's like, because the 7th article of educational law will be in power, and how will schools will operate, you know? And it's not just a question to change the law. It's a question to be on the same page how this article will implement, because all of you recommend right now to read this article in full, because it's not just one sentence that everything should be in Ukrainian, or it's not just the sentence that the only language of education in Ukraine, so is it Ukraine? No, it's not just, it's all 7 points in this article. So there is not a gap, but here is a big sphere of maneuver in this issue, because let's be realistic, it's really hard. It will be really hard to change the law in such framework, political framework that we have inside Ukraine. The only possible way of changing this law, as well as changing the language law, it means that Ukraine establishment or Ukraine power will become one more time pro-Russian. So it will be kind of revenge after the revolution. And as I see, and which is the sociological data show, that there is no reason for this. So this year and next year, very important. To be honest, I'm optimist but realist. I think this is the only chance for real breakthrough in the scope of next 5 years. If we will lose last year or spend it like we spent last 4 years, so then we should wait. I don't know how, how long, and how that article will be implemented. So it will be much more dangerous, because take a look right now, it looks like we are in the lowest point of bilateral relations, but I am not sure. I'm not sure. The problem is that it could be lower even. Yeah. And take a look in a strategic view. I'm really optimist, and I see no reason for tension, even with this law, Ukrainian law, education law, language law. Because take a look, what is funny? That just use data. Half of the year, so after new language law, the 30th article of the language law, of Ukrainian language law, taking power, it means that in the public sphere you should use Ukrainian language as so initially you should use. So if you go somewhere into the restaurant in Ukraine, the waiter should address you in Ukrainian. It's obligatory right now. Or so if he doesn't, you could complain officially. It will be defined, and there is no official complaints of not the following this article from Transcarpathia. So no problem with language. Everybody, so nobody complains. I'm sure that not everybody speaks Ukrainian in the Hungarian of this Tuzhanskyi district restaurants and so on. I'm sure they're not, but it's not a topic. So in comparison, in Kyiv, many complaints. It's like a debate between Ukrainians and Hungarian-speaking people, but in Carpathia, no problem with this. What I visited also in the schools, in the Hungarian schools, I am not sure that this so education law in the 7th article is the real problem for them. Yeah, it needs some how to adopt the programs, the methodology, and so on, but bilingual techniques and also these gaps, not the gaps, but the scope of the maneuver, because take a look, according to Ukrainian law in the 7th article and the explanation of 7th article, official explanation, it could be the way. So these proportions of studying in native language and in Ukrainian language, it's not in the level of subjects. It is in the level of a time. That's why who will control the time, how long you speak during the lesson in Hungarian, in Ukrainian, and so on. That's why this is. So let me just explain you. I'm not motivate or explain you that this Soviet education law will be not so implemented. It will be, but implementation of this 7th article does not necessarily mean assimilation or closing Hungarian classes, schools, and so on.
Thank you very much. It's a very particular problem, and I will ask Attila to talk about maybe more strategic outlook.
Well, I agree with Dmytro that we are at a low point, and I agree with Dmytro that we can be even lower. And of course, there is a big player in this who is happy with the bad relations between Hungary and Ukraine and would be happy to see even worse relations. And of course, this is Russia. It is very clear that they are doing their own little propaganda and other operations. But to go back to how we interpret these laws, we interpret these laws as targeted to Russians, first of all. And it wasn't targeted, Hungarians weren't targeted, but we were hit very hard with these laws. And these laws are leading to assimilation of the Hungarian community. I firmly believe in that. I've been so many times in Beregszás, in Berehovo. Hungarian is disappearing even from Beregszás. I go to a petrol station. I used to say Jó napot kívánok. There is no Jó napot kívánok back anymore in many places. And from Ungvar, from Uzhgorod, Hungarian community totally disappeared. So Hungarians used to be about 1/3 of Zakarpatskoye Oblast during the Hungarian times. It belonged to Hungary, of course, before 1918, a bit less than 1/3. And today, I would be very surprised if they are 10%. I would be very surprised if there is more Hungarians in Subcarpathia, more than 100,000. So they are disappearing by the day. Actually, my friends are asking if they should move now or they should wait for a better time. It's a very bleak picture for the Hungarian community. I was at the wonderful conference organized by Dmytro. And I came back and the Hungarian villages were dark. The windows were dark. And I'm afraid that this is not the exodus yet. This is the start of the exodus of the Hungarian community. And people don't feel good so much in Ukraine. You are right that, of course, there should be more done to learn Ukrainian for the Hungarian community. But when the press, the radio station have to play half Ukrainian, when actually you are obliged to start for a waiter or somebody, even in a village, if there are two persons know each other for 50 years, and you have to start in Ukrainian, it's in your mind that you will be reported or not. There was a report on a Hungarian Christmas song that why it wasn't translated to Ukrainian, and it was a scandal. I mean, these things are not good. You have to understand that these things are not good. So for Ukraine, not targeted the Hungarians. I'm pretty sure about that with these laws, and it's legitimate to strengthen the Ukrainian language, but Hungarians were hit extremely hard. And what makes the Hungarian case separate, that our language is not a Slavic language, and very far, not even an Indo-European language. So Hungarians are in a worse situation in many ways in the future will be than Russians or Poles or Bulgarians, because their languages are close. So actually, if there is no Hungarian education until at least age 14 or age 18, the main education, that will lead to the loss of the language. I'm convinced personally, underlining what I said, that this is not, Hungarians were not targeted, at least at the beginning. So it was not the intention of Ukraine to create this. And about how we can go ahead. It's very important. You mentioned Anton Wikipedia. It's very important to clear our history, to clear what Magyarization was, for example. I was planning to have an article on that. It's still not ready yet, but in many aspects, Ukrainian laws are tougher today than Hungarian laws in former Hungary were before 1918. So these are tough laws. There was more freedom to speak Ruthenian, Ukrainian before 1918. So this is not a good way. Also, we have to see the influence of certain third players. In Wikipedia, I'm pretty sure that some of these things are not done by Ukrainians. There is a rumor being spread in Ukraine that 27,000 Ukrainians were killed by Hungarian troops in 1939. This is absolutely garbage. But it's spreading. It's on the Wikipedia page between the war between the Ukrainian state of Father Voloshin and Zakarpatsko Ukraine, and this is a. Can you imagine if it gets hold in Ukraine that Hungarians massacred 27,000 Ukrainians in 1939, and actually this coincides with the date of March 15, which is a big Hungarian holiday. So it's exploitable. So I was negative until I would try to focus on the positive. So I'm pretty sure that that we could agree. Of course, we have you have elections coming. We have elections coming. So this is not the best time. I always propose that we should take it out from the context of the let's say of the Russian Ukrainian conflict. We had a, I think, very successful basic treaty of friendship. That would be a tool to renew this treaty of friendship and give certain. I understand that these laws cannot be changed so easily in the Rada, but we could have a separate agreement, maybe giving, let's say, legalizing, for example, use of Hungarian symbols, because this is under attack. Again, Hungarian national colors display stuff. It's one of the few remaining great gestures we got from Ukraine. So we should have a new agreement maybe in the future. And we should underline from the Hungarian side that we fully support NATO and EU membership for Ukraine. And there should be much more done on how much Hungary helped actually Ukraine in the last, after 2014, in the last 7 years. Anton, you said very well that there were many, even military aid was given to Ukraine. So it's absolutely not true that we were not helping. I mean, it's a kind of aid if you treat wounded military personnel, but we also give money to Ukraine, for example, to counter Russian cyber warfare, and it should be nice to talk about it. Or we help the water purification systems of Subcarpathia. I mean, it's a big help to help the cities which are now 95% or 90% Ukrainian, like Uzhgorod, like Mukachevo. There are not much Hungarians left in these cities, and we help these cities to have a water system going. So there are many good news in this relationship, and we should focus on them much more. But I think we have to clean up really the historical part of the 39. It's a very dangerous legend being created. We should do Hungarians, of course, gestures, because that was really Hungarian troops and Ukrainian troops clashed near Hust. So that would be a gesture to go there by high Hungarian officials to say that, of course, we are sorry for the dead people. But reconciliation means that we establish, like with Serbia and Hungary, we start to establish the numbers. It's very important because it was not a terrible reign of terror. There was, of course, executions, there were dead people, but it's very important to establish that in our history there are very few clashing points, and actually we shouldn't focus on the negative in the historical relationship. And also, I think the most important thing for the future, and I always tell Dmytro that we should really talk about that, how to ease the border, because it's terrible to cross, and it's a big opportunity to the whole region. To Subcarpathia and even beyond. It's a beautiful region, emotionally very close to Hungarian hearts. I mean, for me, Hust is a poem. Verecke Pass is the national anthem. You must understand, it's very. I don't know how much of you are foreigners and how much foreigners watching it. This is very emotional issues, but that also means that there is interest, and it would mean hundreds of thousands more Hungarians visiting, spending money. Going to Bukovel. Bukovel could be the main Hungarian skiing spot. So it could be like a 200-kilometer system. I mean, we wouldn't go to Austria if we would know it. how nice it is, and the roads are better now. So actually, there is a lot in economical relationship, and it would be the interest of Ukraine. It wouldn't be so much the interest of Austria, but we could spend really tens of millions of euros there. I'm now planning to go back again. I've been 3 times skiing in Bukovel. It's a wonderful place. I can advertise it here too. So anyway, economic relations, cleaning up of the garbage which is in the Tisa River and including the past, realizing that there are certain players who don't want us to be good, but also, and we have to realize that Ukraine is a traumatized country, but Ukraine also have to realize that the last 100 years was very traumatizing for Hungarians, and for us, language issue is a primary issue. Language and symbolic things are primary issues, and I understand it for Ukraine, but we should take it out from the Russian-Ukrainian historical context, because this is not the good way. I think for Ukraine, it would be much better to, not only for Hungary, with Romania and for Ukraine, to establish a different type of language and symbols and whatever relationship that in Russia. So I think this is the good way ahead, but again, there are spoilers on the road. There is again, I think the third party is doing a lot, much more than we realize, to undermine this relationship. So we have to be very cautious. It can go really wrong if we let it. Thank you.
It's okay. Hope. Yeah. So I would identify maybe 5 different issues which could be important in the next years. Well, the very first one, I think we really need a meeting between the leaders of the 2 countries. And since I'm also writing for different Hungarian media outlets, in the last years, we already got this kind of rumors that, okay, now in the next months, we'll have Orban-Zelensky meeting. And then, no, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And so, as Dmytro also mentioned, we really lost all these years, and now the elections are coming in Hungary, so probably we won't have this kind of meeting in the next several months. Maybe we have a chance to have it in the end of the year, next year, I don't know. And then, of course, we have a preparations for the Ukrainian elections. So it's the chances for this kind of meeting is not so high, but I think it would be very important to have a high-level leader meeting between the 2 countries, and it would really change the current situation in the relationship. Then I think the second one is support of Hungary to NATO and European Union accession. I think it's Hungarian interest to support it. So full stop, I think, because of security, economy issues. It's for Hungary, as well as for Hungary's support of the Balkan countries to enter European Union. The same stands for Ukraine. It's national interest of Hungary to support Ukrainian accession. And if you can read from Western press that Hungary doesn't support Ukraine in this regard because they have some shimming with Russia, and that's bullshit, because well, since in 2017 the relations went in different directions. Hungary uses the NATO and EU accession as a tool to pressure Ukraine in this regard, and well, this is the only tool we have, I think, from Hungarian point of view. But on the other hand, the EU accession of Ukraine is really a national interest of Hungary, and I think it will continue in this regard, supporting Ukraine in the next years. The third one, I think, is a cooperation of the Visegrad 4, maybe Visegrad 4 plus format, Visegrad plus 1. And we will see what will be the position of United States in the next years to Ukraine, how will the situation change in Western Europe. But maybe that the Visegrad group will be the main supporter of Ukraine in the next years against Russia, supporting Ukraine in NATO and EU, and Hungary could do a lot in this regard within the Visegrad group. Then the fourth one is energy. Now, because of Hungarian and Russian gas contract, we had a lot of public conflicts, but on the other hand, we just discussed before the meeting that there are some options for Croatian LNG gas coming to Ukraine through Hungary, and I think the cooperation in energy sector is something which will be present in the future as well. And then the fifth one is the transit coming from Ukraine. It was an important direction of well, Zahony was renewed. A lot of money was poured into Zahony to support the increase of the traffic, the train traffic, the freight traffic coming through Zahony. And mainly because of Russian-Ukrainian conflict, all this traffic has stopped. So nothing which was expected is came. For example, all the goods coming from China, they're not coming from through Zahony now, but they are coming through Belarus, Poland. Well, who knows now the relations of Belarus and Poland, what will happen in this regard. But all of these trains entering the European Union, they came through Malashevitsa, through Poland. And a few years ago, we made some projects. How could we increase, how could we help increasing the different directions? Because for Hungary, Ukrainian directions for freight is an important one. And I think a lot could be done in the next years in this regard to support, to help the increase in this kind of transit traffic coming from Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
Just few points to add. Yes, if take in the level of milestone what we have to do and what we can do in next year. So it's important to put efforts and real efforts, not like efforts we did and we conducted last year, because it was not efforts. So in which direction it should be. So strategic communication. Yeah. So it's important to change the image of Hungary in the rest of Ukraine, not just in Zakarpattia. So, and in this regard, it will be strategic communication is a very expensive issue, but take a look what you have. You have Wizz Air with a brilliant image. You have OTP Bank with a brilliant image. You have Miklos Bot with a brilliant image. So engage them. Provide any of campaign to explain, because I think even this very sensitive vision of Hungary towards its national minorities or the foreign Hungarians abroad will definitely provoke not the conflict vision from Ukraine, but the empathy, because all the same issues in language we have during the history, the same with minorities as well, and with all these very sensitive and very let's say this attitude towards history that you have almost the same. And the only problem in this context, in this strategic communication, that you should start like treat Ukraine independently, not as a part of Russian world, not as a part of these pro-Russian, post-Soviet, something. So change this, because right now, after 2014, everything changed. Because, for example, I worked in an advertising company, and I was in a team who helped to launch Discovery Channel in my country. And all these brands like Discovery Channel, Procter & Gamble, Red Bull, when they entered this market, they put Ukraine plus Russia. Right now, it's impossible, and it will be impossible in next, I don't know how many years, because due to Russian sanctions, and it is always, right now it's in the level of business, it's a decision, what kind of market are you going to cover, Ukraine or Russia? So because right now it's impossible to cover both. And in political level, you haven't to choose what is important, because it's not a bit, you have no political sanctions. You could do this, and also with the gas the same, but it's important to distinguish these two parts. And from Ukraine side, it's not also, you know, we in Kiev or in Ukraine, we expect, oh, please, Hungary, do something more, not just this and this. Yeah, for us, and this is the big challenge and big problem in Ukraine, and I don't know how we could cope this, because we need really time and also efforts. We, to be honest, don't have inside the country right now how to distinguish these two discourses, because it's a discourse related to our sovereignty. Right now we have discourse and all the revolution issue, war, and so on. It's the discourse to emancipate and to become free of Russia, pro-Russia, and Russian world. So right now it's the real battle for independence in Ukraine. Right now, exactly right now. So this is the end of these supply chains. Yeah, this is the end of these gas chains, because where we will be in Europe or in Eurasia, where the Russia is. So the decision of Ukrainian people is to be the part of Europe. Yes, and it's important to distinguish this discourse when we protect something from Russia. I mean, not something, but everything, freedom, language, everything. And to distinguish this discourse of protection from the discourse of integration, because integration to the EU, to the NATO, means that you also need to balance protection with something you give. Yeah, I mean, more rights to minorities, more rights. I know this, it's a question of these positive discrimination practices, how to balance, because we couldn't give everything to Hungarians and Romanians and nothing to Russians. Yeah, so it's very, very difficult in mind how to separate and how to understand in different way what Russia did in Crimea, supporting schools, minorities, and so on, from the same, not the same, but almost similar strategy what Hungary is doing in Transcarpathia. But it's important that this is totally different practices, and what is main, with totally different goals. In Ukraine, we still don't understand these in the level of establishment, because, and the result of this expert survey of experts should be very liberal, yeah, as usual, open mind and so on. But Ukraine expert named Hungary as the second, the hostile state after the Russia. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. So Ukraine, we have to find these resources inside the country to distinguish two discourses, and it will be easier. But we still need this, not help, but any kind of not support. So change your strat communications towards Ukraine, and it helps somehow. Because take a look, even 5 years ago, it was when I traveled to Kiev and explained that there is no separatism issue in Zakarpattia, no intentions, at least in the massive or mainstream discourse. People in Kiev ask me, are you work for Orban or Fidesz? We know. What about your second passport? I said, I have no second passport. No worries, it's just the data. But what we did, we conducted the survey last year. We presented the survey about the separatism and all this. We presented in Kiev, in MFA, in different ministers, and we ended up that in the interview or to Havenge, actually to Andras Németh, our MFA minister, stressed publicly what was not in fashion before that, that there is no reason to talk about Hungarian separatism in Zakarpattia. So it was first time publicly said loudly, and it was what is good. It was no like aggressive reaction in Ukraine. Everybody agreed. It was no, Kuleba, what are you talking about? They're all separatists there, all Magyarization, so on, so on. So we have to change this Stratcom communication. It will be changed in attitudes, and step by step to follow these different practices, different way of thinking. Yeah, and yeah, so we expect that Hungary should also help with this understanding.
A lot of issues, and we even don't talk about electricity grid questions and so on. But I thank you all for dialogue so far, and I will give a floor to our guests and colleagues to ask their questions and comment on our topic. And please be short and be maintain a strategy level discussion if you can. Is there any question? Yes, please.
Maybe after those long speeches, this question might sound strange, but I think the key is in Ukrainians' hand when it comes to educational law and language law. Why just can't Ukrainian part exclude Polish, Hungarian, Slovakian, Romanian language from this law and keep it just targeting on Russia?
To me, yes, Georgy. Yeah, so I support this idea. To be honest, I even spoke to the team who initiated, who worked in the basic version of this law. It's Lilia Grinevich team, because do you know that, you know probably that the law was changed immediately in the parliament. It was this, you know, strange formulation of this article and then like this hybrid, because in the initial version of the law, national European national minorities, or I mean minorities which represents the EU member states, should keep the right of studying in their native language in the level of schools, not just in the level of classes. It was initial version, then it was changed. And take a look. I'll be happy, and I support this idea to exclude, definitely. But I am not sure that this is really workable in sense of two senses of all Ukraine's obligation of this Council of Europe and so on and so on. All these, I mean, in just legislation level. And second. This is a question of national security and national cohesion for Ukraine, to study and to know Ukraine language. Yes, and for me, this is, take a look, anyway, in Ukraine, it is clear that we need to change methodology or approach, because methodology right now is like a kind of alternative to the law. So don't change the law, but please change the methodology of study Ukrainian language. But so we need to change approach of studying and diving in Ukrainian context of national minorities. We need to change this approach. In which way? Me personally, I support the idea of motivation. Hungarians, Romanians to study Ukrainian, to provide conditions, not through quotas, not through banning, not through these like strict obligations or strict rules in the schools. But this is the question how it works in the reality and how it will work in reality. Because take a look in Zakarpattia, in Karpatoyo right now, we have a real problem, not even with the methodology of studying Hungarian or of studying Ukrainian for Hungarians or Romanians. We have the problem with the teachers. There are no teachers in rural area. There's a strong deficit of teachers who will teach any language you need. I even spoke to the teachers in this is also Pretisansky district near Vinohradovo, near Vsevyush. It's one of the village where 99% or 90 at least percent Hungarians, native Hungarians, but they have no teachers. So Ukrainian nationality teachers come from Vinogradovo, so every day to this village, and they teach children. I don't know in what language, because take a look, first classes, you have children which are coming from the totally Hungarian sphere, totally Hungarian the families, they could speak Hungarian, but no Ukrainian. On the other hand, you have the teacher who couldn't speak Hungarian fluently, that could speak Ukrainian. So could you imagine what is the level of education and of perception of the subject? Because there was also a teacher of English, and she said, could you imagine my classes that we should speak Ukrainian, Hungarian, both mixed to study English? This is, you know, the crazy. That's why Zakarpattia has the lowest level of passing this ZNO test. This is the general test. This is so. Right now, we should be really like aware that we have not just problem between Hungary and Ukraine, not just political issue. This is the problem of education at all, and it is very complex problem, and it's not just about the language of teaching and studying, but it's of course methodology, people, schools, and so how children will be good in different and actual subjects. So it's much more difficult. That's why I'm not the I'm the fan, or I'm the supporter of your idea, but I'm not sure that this is the solution. It will be the solution just for this current political tension between two countries, but not the solution of the problem.
I think there's also a political aspect in this regard, because as Zelensky at first tried to, in his electoral campaign, tried to target both the population of the East and the population of the West, such a move to kind of discriminate the Russian population would be, I think, not, in his point of view, would not be beneficial, because he would lose the electors from the East who would say that, oh, this is discrimination. And then he would also lose the voters from the West, because they say, why should we exclude the Poles or the Hungarians? So in this regard, I think in Ukrainian politics, they will not go in this direction, because politically it's a dangerous step, right?
So just short and very quick, because I have exactly data on this issue. We have Mother Tongue Day in Ukraine. It's exactly in the beginning of November, and it was one more survey about what language you consider as your mother tongue, and 78% of Ukrainians said that we think that my mother tongue is Ukrainian, and only 18% said Russian. So this is, it's crazy data, because I'm sure that not 78% of Ukrainians speaks Ukrainian, but this is the question of perception. The issue, political issue that you told, it's a real a political. It's already so electoral behavior, because language issue was 30 years of Ukrainian independence a political issue, not the issue, and the issue to divide different part of Ukraine, divide different communities, to separate different, I don't know, these like language groups, pro-Russians, Russian, and so on and so on. But it is not always the reality. It is not always a ground. It's not always the real stuff. It's mainly how people are manipulating, you know. And yeah, but of course, that's why I told that we have 1 year, because next it will be this logic that you told. Yeah, it will be also different parts will find the narrative they could manipulate with. Language will be probably the number one, or at least in the top 5.
Attila, please.
Just one remark. So if you really analyze the Ukrainian suggestions, why it's needed, actually, I always tell Dmytro that 100 years ago, exactly the same, 110 years ago, the Hungarians said exactly the same to the national minorities in Hungary, that you cannot join, you cannot be successful without speaking Hungarian. And of course, the national minorities of Hungary, including the Ruthenians, Ukrainians, Romanians, Slovaks, interpreted it as Magyarization. So Ukrainians, actually, knowingly or not, but they are using the same reasoning to us. And actually, that's the problem, that even if you are right in some sense that there should be more Ukrainian in the schools, it will be interpreted very badly. And that's why I said, if not the EU languages, then we should have separate agreements between the countries, and on a reciprocal basis. So what Hungary is would offer in that sense, I mean, would be the same what Ukraine offers to us. So there would be reciprocity, and reciprocity is a good thing in diplomacy. That's the only solution out of this problem, I think.
Thank you very much. I always suggest to our Ukrainian partners to change the narrative, because nowadays we try to understand and interpret Hungarian language issue in context with war with Russia, which is a bad narrative. The better narrative I suggest to use is about joining European Union and NATO. You can see a lot of excellent examples in Europe which are working, South Tyrol or different areas. You can see how different languages work together, and these regions always prosper in Europe. So this one part of a solution. But now, thank you all. Thanks to our experts and guests today for this excellent dialogue. Today we all contributed to development of a positive Ukrainian-Hungarian relationship. And please be part of our events and discussions in the future as well. Stay up to date with our social media and webpage. And see you all at the next event. Thank you very much and goodbye.